From your calendar, Adrian McInman starts in 30 minutes.
All right, let's go now. Hey, welcome to another episode of on OTS Live. Today we have another interesting guest, none other than Adrian McInman, who has been around the world. Basically, he has trained people in over 26 countries in business, even with police in Trinidad and Tobago. He has trained cricket organizations, the Sri Lanka Cricket, Zimbabwe Cricket Board, and then also he has crossed over into football, which is we're going to lean towards that a bit today. But also we're going to be talking about about what is his experience in cricket also too. He has worked in football, Botswana Football Association, Ghana National Olympic Committee, and he comes with a wealth of knowledge. So let me introduce our guest today. So let's go. Adrian, how are you today?
G'day, buddy. I'm doing good.
All right. Great to see you, man. Great to see you. We spoke before. So I know your interest and your enthusiasm around, the sports psychology. I know you're a clinical psychologist too. You're trained as a clinical psychologist too. But you have been leaning, I see, towards sports more than anything else, especially cricket.
Yeah, I actually have 7 university qualifications, of which my first master's was in sports psychology. And then I got a master's in clinical psychology so I could be registered with the board just for the paperwork more than anything else. But my heart's always been in sport. And as you rightly say, I've worked now with 28 sporting associations. I've worked all up with about 136 organizations, 25 of which have been in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, Antigua, Trinidad, St. Lucia, etc. And it's been really cool. I love what I do. When I have a nice contract, you can't see a happier bloke. I mean, it's really cool.
That's nice. Glad to hear that. And that leads me to say one thing. I remember growing up in the early days, when you talk about the sports psychologists, there were psychologists to people. they get scared. They run off.
Mm-hmm. And Jamaica, athletes, they sprint.
I can imagine, because they think something like, hey, you're mentally, you're not right. So let us start off by asking, and you explain to me, who exactly is a sports psychologist?
Okay. It depends on which country you're in. There can be a legal answer to that question that takes precedence. If you are in Australia, if you're in the United States and you call yourself a psychologist and you're not registered with the appropriate board, you can be sued. So a definition of a psychologist in those countries differs from a country, say, like Afghanistan, where I worked with the cricket team there. So I don't actually like to use the word sports psychologist that particularly much. I think what's better is to use mental skills trainer. And I emphasize that last word, trainer, is that's what I do. The reality is when somebody comes to see me, they have problems. If I was to ask you, I'm not going to, but if I ask you, buddy, do you have any problems? On live TV, you're not going to say so, but the reality is you probably do. And then if I ask you, do you know the solution to your problems? Once again, you would probably say, well, yes, I do. So then the simple question is, well, why don't you do something about it? You know what the problem is. You know the solution. Just go on and do it. But there's something that's stopping you. And so I don't waste my time focusing the way most psychologists do, looking at problems and solving them. Instead, I leave that because I know most people don't uncomfortable. But you already told me they want to run away as soon as they hear the word psychology and psychologist. So what I do is I train people to be more effective using the most important part of their body in a way that's much more comfortable. So yes, there are things called sports psychologists legally, but I think a better way to look at it is mental skills trainer. And once again, I emphasize that last word, trainer, because that's what it's like when you come see me. If you talk to some of the guys that I have trained, like I'll give you just one example, a guy called Eddie Moore from South Africa. He trained with me 34 sessions, and it's not easy. I don't make it sit on the couch and enjoy yourself and tell me about your problems and let's have a cozy conversation. No, I'm here to train you so you use this more effectively. And the results are amazing. So I think we're better off, even though I am technically a sports psychologist, let's think of it as like mental skills training.
Okay. And not use the word psychologist up front.
Well, whatever rocks the boat.
All right, so that leaves me, Adrian, to ask, because a lot of questions have been asked by players and people who are doubtful of what a sports psychologist brings to the table, right? So let us look at how you think how can athletes and coaches gain by using someone like you who is a sports psychologist.
Well, I think the first thing to really address that not everybody's going to want to initially hear is that a sports psychologist can have a bigger impact on an athlete than any other staff member. And why? Every single thing we do is affected by this. If you go to bat, if you go to bowl in cricket, if you kick a ball, if you head a ball, it's not your head and your arms and your legs that's doing all these things. It started with your brain. Everything we do I tune into this telecast or do I walk away because he's boring? That is decided by your brain before your legs get involved. Everything we do is affected by this and is usually started by this. So therefore, it's an open gamut. I can literally improve the performance of just about anything because everything is started or affected by this. So I split it up into two. The way I look at it is you have the performance on the paddock, in football on the field and cricket on the oval. What happens on that field is something that I can have a big impact on. But at the same time, there's all the things that happen away from the field that I also have a massive impact on. So let's just take the first one, then we'll take the second one. In terms of the field, you're right. I've spent a lot of time in cricket, and the major reason why it's a numbers game, so you can prove that you're having an effect. I'll give you one example. I trained with Sri Lanka cricket women's team for just 6 weeks. And at the end of it, the vice captain, who initially was the captain, is now the captain today, Shamari Atapatu. She only trained with me for 6 weeks. We did approximately 20 sessions. And on the very last day, she surprised me. I had no idea. She comes up to me and she tells me that her highest score has now improved by 31%. 31%. She was up to scoring 141. And she also told me that on 2 occasions she had batted all 50 overs. She had never done that before. And she told me the reason why was she was now not as aggressive. She was implementing the techniques I taught her, and she was more calmer, and she was able to do her job better. That's a 30 and a 31% improvement in just 6 weeks. The phone of international coaches would be running off the hooks if they could produce anything like that. 31% in 6 weeks, you imagine what you do in a whole year. They would never get a chance to sleep because their phone would always be ringing because people want to hire them. The reality is you can do on the field in terms of performance improvement is massive. And one of the reasons why is that when an international athlete sees somebody like me, they usually haven't seen many people like me their whole career. And so I can do just about anything I like, and it's new for them, and I will be able to take them from where they are up to here quite quick. But a soccer coach will not be able to do anything like as much, because the average football player has already seen coach after coach after coach after coach. So what on earth is another coach going to really teach them that's going to improve their performance by much? Next to nothing, maybe 5% in a year. Whereas I can come along and massively change the performance of their ability on the field in a very short period of time. But one thing I didn't tell you, the really nice thing about Shamari Atapatu was she told me that she improved out of sight in just 6 weeks. But here's the best part. Her English wasn't all that good. And she told me on the last day, I only understood 1 out of every 2 words you said. But that was enough. I could feel what you were saying, and I was able to implement it. So that's on the field in the match. Now let's take away. I can have a massive impact just getting the people to the game. For instance, at the moment, Sri Lanka Cricket have failed to get one of their players to the game. He is rotting away in a prison or in a jail because allegedly he was found that he had heroin in his car or in the car. Now, is more training in the nets going to decrease the chance of him having heroin in his car? Is more training in the gym going to decrease the chance of him having heroin in his car? Clearly not. But if you saw a mental skills trainer every week, 52 weeks, 4 years, you can't tell me that his chance of doing such a behavior is the same as not having that training. Clearly, effective, state-of-the-art mental skills training can have a massive impact on behavior, like somebody getting caught with heroin in their car, or somebody driving a car and allegedly killing them, or somebody getting involved in a melee or physical altercation and having their contract lost for a whole year. Likewise, take Zidane's headbutt. If he had been trained by somebody like me, time after time after time after time, he would be less likely to do something like that, get thrown off the field, and as a result, not get the thing they were there for, the World Cup. You know, so a lot of the things that we can do to improve performance on the paddock start with before the paddock. Nests. 5 things. NESTS. And I know you want to talk about this later, but just briefly, what this is nutrition, exercise, sleep, thinking, and social support. And those 5 things have a huge impact on your happiness and your performance. Nutrition is done away from the field. Exercise is done away from the field. Sleep is done away from the field. And so if you do those things more effectively, we know that you'll perform better. In fact, and here is where some people will not like what I'm going to say. The reality is that we can predict more than 95% who is going to win a match, be it in football or in cricket, before a single kick is had or a single bowl is bowled. Why? If I go into, let's say the West Indies are playing South Africa, and I walk in and I talk to Quinton and I talk to the Proteas and I say, can you answer these 2 questions honestly? How confident are you're going to win? And how much sleep did you get last night? And then I walk next door and I talk to Phil Simmons and the boys and I say, guys, can you just answer these 2 questions? How confident are you're going to win? And how much sleep did you get last night? We can predict with more than 95% prediction who's going to win. And they had nothing to do with tactics, nothing had to do with technique. It was all things that are the area of a sports psychologist. So that's the sort of thing that a sports psychologist can do. They can have a massive impact before the game is played and on game day that really nobody else is really trained to do.
That's interesting, Adrian, because I want to get back to that, talking to the teams and predicting who might win. 95%, which is a very high number. But what areas of nest would be maybe an area that affects that condition more? All the nest, the nest that you spoke about, in your experience, which one of those areas would a coach want to pay more attention to that would affect him maybe losing or winning?
Okay, in terms of, let's bring the coach second. In terms of which one is the most effective, all five are massively impacting. Massively impacting. If you eat all the wrong food, you won't be able to perform your job as well. And if you end up eating the wrong food and getting fatter, you can't do it as well, etc. And especially for some sports, cricket, there are overweight players who still perform well. So maybe it's not as important in, say, football, where if you're overweight, you're not going to play football very well. Exercise, sleep, massively important. Let's just take sleep. Once again, let's go back to cricket because I can give you actual numbers. I had a cricketer in the under-19 team, and he was scoring 0, 2, 12. He wasn't performing at all. He came along and all he did was 9 hours with me. He turned up for 4 2 hours and 1 hour. And next thing you know, he's scoring 91 runs. And I had no idea. He told me this on the last day. And I said, well, how did you do it? And he said, simple. I listened to what you said. And I did what you said. And I said, well, what was it that got through to you? And he said, you told me I needed to get more sleep. Now, obviously, a coach could say that. But the difference between me and a coach is usually the coach doesn't have the ammunition. They don't have the research to show how you can improve performance. This guy was now getting over 9 hours sleep because I told him a simple study. In a simple study, what they did was they got basketball players. And the basketball players were tested on a sprint, on shooting, etc. They were then told, for the next 14 days, just get your normal sleep. They were retested on sprinting, shooting, etc. And then they were told, for the next 14 days, you must get 10 hours sleep or more each night. And then they were retested 14 days later. So there's 3 testing phases. And what they found was that when they were getting more sleep, and then you might be interested to know, they actually got 10 hours and 24 minutes sleep on average. They did not have a problem getting sleep. If you're in the Proteas, if you're in Manchester United, you might be saying, how am I going to get that amount of sleep? They didn't have a problem. But their improvement in sprinting was massive. But what was really nice was when they were at the free throw line and when they were taking shots from the 3-point area, their improvement went up by 9.1%. Just by getting something I'm sure at times you want, more sleep. Performance improved by 9 and 9.1% just by getting sleep. And that's the difference. A coach can say to a player, you need to get more sleep. But they're not necessarily going to listen to them. But I can bring the research, I can bring the sports science to them in a way that resonates with the players.
I understand that. But let us look at the reality now. You are all teams, you know. I'm sticking to cricket. I mean, we're going to talk about football because I believe that mentally it's not much different in any sport. And I'll go to football in a minute, but because this is important, the areas you're talking about affects both sports, all sports. No sleep, that's a problem. You know, the concentration we'll talk about in a bit. But does as far as you know, all of the top teams now that play test cricket and maybe even 50-50 on one day, do they travel with a sports psychologist?
Maybe in 2070, not in 2021, buddy. It's sad.
Yeah.
When I did my first master's back in 1985, I think it was, through to 1988. And I remember the very first paid presentation I did in 1988. And I thought I was going to get 30 Australian dollars for doing that at the end of it. And the guy pulls out his checkbook and he says, "How much do you want?" And I said, "What do you mean? It's $30. And he said, No, that was brilliant. I'll give you at least 100. How much do you want?" And I said, "Okay, give me 100. And what surprised me was that he honestly thought it was really good. But I look back now with over 30 years experience and I'm thinking what I gave them was so minimal that we've progressed so far since then. But the reality is no. Right now, there are a number of teams in the football world and the cricket world and so many other sports that have nobody. And I've talked to so many of the elite players and you ask them, how many years of sports psychology training have you had? And they look at you like, what? How many sports psychologists have you had? And some of them will just say, no, we've had nothing. It's really sad that 30-something years since I did my master's, nothing has really changed for so many. And what I am noticing, though, is a big difference between, let's take the cricket world to start with, which I really know a bit better. Australia has a sports psychologist with the national men's team and another one for the women's team. New Zealand have people. England have people. India have people. But now let's take teams like Sri Lanka and some of the other lower teams. They're still fairly high up. They have nobody. Does the West Indies have a guy that's 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, 4-year contract? No. Why? And what we're seeing is this. Slowly but surely, we're seeing this. It's not so much the bottom teams are going down. It's just the top teams are going up. I'll give you an example. Let's just imagine that you are ranked somewhere between 7 and 12. Your national team is ranked 7 to 12. And you go to one country and you lose 2 matches. Then you go to a different country and you lose another couple of matches. What are you likely to do? Well, what we know from research is that people don't change. They don't like to change. So if you're failing, what do? They create a meeting with ex-players and they're all concerned about improving things. So they then make some suggestions. But what are their suggestions? Their suggestions are very much of the same. Okay, so we're going to work on the beat test. We're going to do more physical fitness stuff. And we're going to improve the domestic system. Well, if you improve the domestic system, is that going to change your national team quickly? No, it's going to take a long time for that to contribute. But if you actually did things that we were doing back in 1985, let alone 2021, of training this, you can get results in 6 weeks, as I've demonstrated with Sri Lanka cricket 5 years ago. But unfortunately, because people are scared of psychology, psychologists, getting out of their comfort zone, and a whole lot of other things I'm sure we'll talk about in the future, we don't go that way. And we keep doing the same old, but somehow we expect miraculously a different result. And we all know that's insanity.
Yeah, I have a very interesting question for you before we move on. From Tracy and David. She's asking, how do coaches and players remain mentally conditioned during the pandemic? I think this is a question that is rather interesting because from your point of view, we should have sports psychologists with us. So can you answer that question for her?
Yeah, cool. I'd answer it in a number of ways. Firstly, a pandemic is a fantastic opportunity. You are now locked away in a hotel room, away from friends and family with less distraction and probably a control on your alcohol. And so as a consequence, there's more time to train mentally with somebody like me. So you can see it as a fantastic opportunity. You don't have to see it as a negative. Yes, it's constraining in some ways, but in actual fact, it's a fantastic opportunity. Furthermore, what I think you'll find is if you actually did a research study and you got all the athletes who've been in the bio bubble from all the sports and asked them to rate on a scale from 1 to 10 how difficult they found it mentally to handle the bio bubble, And then you ask them the second question of how many hours have you spent with a mental skills coach, a sports psychologist, you would find a relationship. Those who've trained with somebody like me would handle the situation much more effectively. But if you haven't been trained by somebody like me, you are less likely to handle it well. Because let's be honest, being locked away in a hotel room time after time after time, and all the other issues that go with it, like the food and whatever, it's a challenge. But if you've been trained by somebody like me, you're going to handle that better than if you haven't had that training. That's why it almost seems like ludicrous. This should be the perfect opportunity. Somebody like myself should be on never getting sleep. I should be working all the time, because the reality is there's such demand. I mean, there has been well-known in the media players who've had to have mental health breaks because they found that it's difficult in this period. Well, what's the solution? Do you go see an architect to help you with that? Do you go see a plumber to help you with that? Do you go see a coach to help you with that? No, a coach, a plumber, and an architect have not gone to university for 6 or plus years learning how this works. And so as a result, they can only tell you what they've learned in their own lives and what they've heard around the traps. Far better going to a dentist for dental issues, and far better going to a mental expert in a pandemic for these kinds of issues.
Yeah. Thanks for your question, Tracy, and very interesting. Good response from our guest sports psychologist, and I think that is important because Adrian, I have to buy into that with you, because you can now do these things virtually now. It's not, you have to be sitting with the player or the coach or the manager or whoever you're trying to influence. I think that's what I
do right now. That's actually how I survive at the moment until international travel starts going and I get myself a proper contract. I actually train people in India, in South Africa, in New Zealand, etc., online, and it works quite well. It does take a bit longer. What would normally be done in 60 minutes takes a bit longer, but beyond that, it works well.
Yes. All right. Now let's just move on. I'm gonna be juxtaposing the cricket with the football, and that's an area that I think. All right. Before I ask that question, why do you think, is it a fear from coaches, or is it a fear from players, or a lack of understanding why they don't embrace sports psychologists the way you think they should?
Oh, yeah. So there are many reasons. The biggest reason is, as you say, it's fear. But let's break that down, because there's more than one kind of fear being involved here. Firstly, there's the fear as soon as you hear the word psychology or psychologist, and I don't blame people for that. I remember when I did my second master's back in 2004, I think it was. I walk into this rectangular room, I take one look at the people, and then I think, oh my God, have I got the wrong place? Are these the patients, or are these the students who are going to become psychologists? And sadly, they were the students who are going to become psychologists. And I was thinking, oh my God, am I going to have to be with them for 2 years? You know, the reality is the psychology, as soon as you hear the word psychologist, you want to run away. And there's a good reason why. Some of the people who gravitate to that industry have issues and they're trying to solve their problems. Now, that's cool, but it doesn't make the situation comfortable for you and me. Likewise, I think the psychology associations around the world, like the Australian Psychology Society and the American Psychology Association, really need to be shaken up and down. They do a tremendously bad job of solving this problem. We've had this, what's the right word? I forget the word. We've been scared of psychologists and psychology for far too long, and it should have stopped a long time ago. But the APA and the APS and all these other organizations spend too much time on very small issues, and they should be getting rid of the stigma. That was the word I was looking for. You've got to get rid of the stigma. And I blame it on the AMA and the American Psychological Association, etc. They should spend a far bigger amount of their money, etc., working on something like that. So that's one of the problems, nothing to do with you and me. Then there's the problem of coaches and administrators. And especially with coaches, what you'll find is a lot of coaches don't have any university qualifications whatsoever. They have no idea whatsoever about biomechanics beyond a little bit that they've read here and there and seen videos on YouTube. They've got no real idea about sports psychology, sports sociology, skill acquisition. What they do know is have specialist great skills in things like techniques, tactics, and overall understanding of the game. But when it comes to sport science, they don't even have the understanding of what we had in the 1980s, etc. And it really needs to change. Now, I would go the same, and I'd say the same with the administrators. Not so much at the CEO level, they tend to have master's degrees, etc., and inappropriately in management or leadership. But if you have a look at directors of cricket, directors of football, and have a look at how many of them have a master's degree, how many have even just a bachelor's degree, you'll be surprised that vast majority have none. And in actual fact, what often happens is they are placed into these positions too quickly. One day they're an international footballer or international cricketer. Next thing you know, they're director of cricket or director of football, and they need mentorship and help. And it's not their fault. Sometimes they're just put in these positions, and it's really doing the athletes, the administrators, and everybody, the fans, a disservice by putting people into positions where they really don't have 2021 skills and expertise. They learn on the job, which is great, and it's nice to help your ex-players further in life. But we can do better, and I think we need to do better. I think we need to say, well, let's raise the bar. Let's expect that if you are going to be in a high management position, you at least have a bachelor's degree in sports science or in management, leadership, etc. So you can bring more to the table for the athletes, etc. So that's another reason, is that when somebody like me is introduced, they've got no understanding of what I can do. They're already scared of psychology and psychologists, and they have no idea of what I can do. And so when I meet people, oftentimes I'm having conversations that we used to have in the 70s and 80s of what, like your first question, what is a sports psychologist? What can we do? And you would think 30, 40 years later, we wouldn't have to have that conversation, but we have to have it time and time and time again, because people end up in positions with no real big understanding of sports science. For instance, I'll give you one example. I was talking to a coach in India, and he was going on how he'd just done a 24-hour course. I don't mean in one day. I mean 2 hours one day, 2 hours another, etc. And at the end of the 24 hours, he was really wrapped that he'd spent so much time becoming more educated. And that's good. I applaud him. But think about it. 24 hours, there's not even one little course in your first year at university. It's such a small percentage compared with somebody with a bachelor's and a master's degree. And I think we need to raise the bar. We have to expect more from administrators. We have to expect more from coaches. And
right,
maybe not.
Let me jump in here though.
Sure.
You're discounting the experience of a player to say that you're bringing someone who is who has a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, but you're not really discounting the fact that they had all this 10 years, 15 years of experience playing the game. Could we look at it in a different way? Because when you do a master's degree or a bachelor's degree of whatever you're covering, but could we look at it as, say, for instance, should he go through, because on the practical side, Adrian, we can't discount that, right? On the practical side.
So let me help you, because I know what your question is, but you haven't said it. I think you're right. But I think what we need to do is this. We need to raise the bar. And how I say it is this. Yes, as a coach, you need the technical understanding and the tactics understanding that you won't get at university. You won't get. But you also need, not so much at the coach level, but certainly at the director of football, director of cricket level.
Or the
you need to have an understanding of sports science. So my argument is this. Not so much for coaches, but definitely for somebody like a director of football, director of cricket, when you're put in that position, you should be told that 6 years from now, you must have a bachelor's degree. So you can go off and do it part-time and slowly over time. Maybe 6 years is the wrong number. I don't care about the number. But my idea is if you've got the skills and tactics, but you don't have anything in the way of understanding of sports sociology, sports psychology, etc., you need to get to sort of comparable level. And so you should also be paid. You should be paid extra when you now have that bachelor's degree or let alone a master's degree. By increasing the level, we will improve the decisions that administrators make, and as a result, the players will gain. Now, let me explain why this is so important. When I went to one, and it was a cricket association, I could not get the captain to talk to me about training because all the captain wanted to do was talk about the problems that the team has with the administrators and the boards. One, the problems they had was the boards were always changing. And two, that the boards had no real understanding of their sport and how to do it at the elite level. And if you then looked at the number of them on the board that had degrees, they didn't. And on top of that, some of them had never played the sport as well. So I think we need to do this. We need to expect better. And now there are other ways to do this that don't have to be about university. For instance, if you want to stimulate the boys to do better, should you smoke cigarettes in front of the players in the changing room, as happens at franchise level in some countries? If you are trying to stimulate the boys to work harder because they're not working hard enough, their fitness level's not so good, but you have a big fat stomach, is that really the best way to motivate them? Now, I'm not saying that you need to be at 50 years of age an elite athlete any longer. That would be a bit ridiculous. But I think we can all do better. And some of these things are not hard. It's just to look in the mirror and have a hard look at yourself and say, can I do better? Can I do a little bit more exercise? Can I get a little bit more sleep? Can I eat just a little bit less? Can I make the stomach a little bit smaller? Can I get out and run a little bit more? We can do better.
You have opened a can of worms here because that is, it's always one of the controversial we talk about education and who should be what and all that, because as long as you're discounting the experience. But I have a couple of questions for you before we move on. Let me see if I can get that on screen here. And Leonard is asking a question about you should bear in mind that all people have diplomas and degrees to be the best. They don't have to have those things. I think you answered that already in a sense.
Sure.
Because you agree to
well, let me just answer that just one little bit further. We are in particular talking about the brain. And what we know from research is that for a lot of things, you are not more effective with a degree in helping somebody change. For instance, there are certain psychological conditions that have been proven not to improve because a helper has a degree versus a helper who does not have a degree. Now, there are some conditions where if a helper has a degree in psychology, we know the person's more likely to change. But there are a lot of things that you don't need to have a degree in to help somebody change. For instance, let's just take depression. The average person really only needs to sit down and listen to the depressed person, encourage them to be active. One of the key things to get rid of depression is to become more optimistic and increase activity. And if somebody has never been to university but has some empathy, can understand what it's like to be depressed, they can help stimulate that person to go out and go for a walk and to be more optimistic. And immediately you'll see changes in depression. So the audience member is absolutely correct. You don't have to have university qualifications to make changes. But that's not what we're really talking about. What we're really talking about is that having a Bachelor of Physical Education or something similar means you have an understanding of the basics of sports science that so many people in sport don't have. Athletes can perform so much better, but the people around them don't have nearly as much understanding of the real basics in sport. They are great at tactics, they're great at techniques, but you ask them anything about, okay, so how do you increase self-esteem? How do you decrease the chance of a person having heroin in their car? How do you decrease the chance of somebody getting involved in a fight? They've got no idea. And that's where university has its place. It gives you a basis of the basics so you can do better. But you're right, you don't need university qualifications to make changes in somebody else, because guess what? The most important the most important things you need to help somebody change are yourself.
Yeah.
I'll give you one example. Risk taking. If you are not willing to take risks, just like I'm taking a risk right now by saying we should improve our performance, we should get rid of our fat stomachs, we should stop smoking as coaches and administrators. That's taking a risk. If you're not willing to do things like that, you are not going to stimulate people to change as much. For instance, right now I know there are international captains and international athletes watching right now this performance, this interview. And if I'm not willing to take risks, then they're going to be saying, well, no, this guy's an idiot. He wraps himself up in cotton wool. He doesn't inspire me. But if I'm willing to say things that I know are true, I have research to prove it, but sound controversial to those who aren't informed, well, then a player says, well, this guy's, I might not like his accent. I might not like him, but he talks sense. I get inspired by this. So what we know is, who you are as a person matters massively. Are you willing to take risks? Are you willing to see yourself for who you are? Do you set reasonable goals? Do you know your own values? There's a lot of good research to show that the most important thing in helping somebody change is the characteristics of the person. And that's clearly got nothing to do whatsoever with university training.
But I like the fact that you also, if you want to change, sometimes you have to be able to ask or difficult questions. I have a question here that's going to test your clinical psychology background.
Oh, here we go.
Tracy Ann Davis again. She says, I think she's referring to when we were talking about nests, which is what you're going to talk about some more. But she said, can these techniques you talk about be applied to general aspects of life and not just sports, but just performance improvement in general?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let's take social support, which is part of NEST. You've got nutrition, exercise, sleep, thinking, social support. What social support is: relationships with friends, family, neighbors. Well, that's really got nothing to do really with sport. But what we know is if you have good social support, you perform better on the paddock. If your relationship with your wife or your husband or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your coach or the team manager is better, you perform better. And one of the reasons why is that with good social support, you smile more, you're happier. And we know very well, I'll give you an example from cricket. In cricket, there was a guy called Peter Tottledell, who got the players at county level they had a beeper. When the beeper went off, they had to write down how happy they were, and then they looked at how many runs they'd scored. And what they found was the happier the team was and the happier the individual was, the more runs they were scored. And why that's important with nests is nests are the 5 things that have the biggest impact on whether you are happy or not. So if you have good social support, that makes you happy. And if you're happy, you score more runs in cricket. You'll probably score more goals in football, etc., etc. So, yes, these things apply to everybody on this planet. There's nobody on this planet this doesn't apply to. If you eat a lot of bad food, too much, and the wrong kind of food, you get fat, and there's not a single research study on the planet that shows being obese makes you happier than not being obese. The same applies for exercise, sleep, and all the other things. Take sleep. We know from lots of research that if you don't get enough sleep, then you aren't as happy. And if you're not as happy, your interactions with other people tends to be not as good. You're a bit more grumpy, and therefore you end up not performing as well, and they don't perform as well. So yes, these apply to everybody. We just happen to be talking about footballers, cricketers, and athletes. But we could be talking about drug addicts. We could be talking about the general population. We could be talking about nurses, police officers. Same thing.
Okay. All right, let's move on to an area. I have several questions coming at you. We have limited time, but I want to get in as many as possible. Right? Now, let us look at concentration. Let's go to football now, because I think cricket and football, in a sense, is because you have in football you have the coach on the sideline talking to the player, getting to the players' minds and heads. Right? In cricket, it is the individual now, after you have spoken to him about whatever it is that is lacking. Say concentration. Let me just say something a little bit about the cricket first, because I know when a person is in there batting for 4 hours, concentration plays a great part in that. But also, his concentration can have to do with the fact that the player at the other end is in form. What does he do now to maintain and keep that partnership going? So that's concentration by itself there. But let us go to football now. Can sports psychology improve concentration? Let's talk about football now.
Sure. Perfect example is, I don't know if you watched the Inter Milan match versus, I can't pronounce, something like Sassoli. I can't pronounce the name. I'm not Italian.
Yeah. I know,
you know the team, right?
Is that Italian Greek? Sassuolo.
Yeah, exactly. About 3 days ago, Inter Milan played them. And in the 84th minute, one of the players threw the ball and he got a yellow card. And why? It was lack of concentration and also a bit of a mind explosion in a negative way. Never needed to happen. If he had trained with somebody like me, it would be far less likely to happen. And you see it all the time. So that's the case of a player. But you're talking about the coaches. Well, once again, you see that a lot in football, especially slightly lower down. The higher up you go, you'll notice that a lot of them have learnt from mistakes, because the media, the cameras are always on them. They learn to tone down some of their their more destructive behavior. But you can still see a number of coaches who display behaviors that we know from science, we know from psychology, we know from research is not effective. For instance, I was working with a national football team. I won't tell you which one. And after a few weeks, the players came up to me. There was about 8 of them came up to me. And they said, "Can we talk?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." They said, "We have a problem." "Okay, well, what's your problem?" "The coaches." And I said, "Okay." And they said, well, "They're always negative. They never say anything positive. It's always negative, 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 negative. At training, they're negative. On the game, they're negative. Always shouting and screaming." And that's where you notice that we're still back in the 1970s and the 1980s. Psychology has improved so much. We've known for over 50 years that reinforcement of a positive nature produces better results on the paddock than punishment and negative, negative, negative. But unfortunately, a lot of coaches, because they're not educated in sports science, they're not educated in basic psychology. They tend to do things that their previous coaches have done, which has been negative, negative, negative. I'll give you an example. I was with a totally different country, their football team. And I think it was the director of football was very kind to show me a video of one of his coaches on the sideline going berserk and negative towards the players. And he understood, he could identify that this behavior was not helping the players. But the coach just didn't really realize what he was doing. Now, yes, there are differences between sports. And you explained quite well that in cricket, the coaches removed more away. They don't have it. You can't hear them. Oftentimes they're upstairs behind glass and the players out batting and bowling are not going to hear them. So it's a different dynamic. And also there's slightly different unwritten and written rules as to how coaches can behave. Sometimes with football, it's almost like sometimes you wonder if the coach is purposely doing it just for show. But the reality is that different sports have different ways of doing things, but it doesn't mean that they're the right way. We know that positive reinforcement works way better than punishment. And I was very impressed. One time I was with, I won't say who, but an international cricket team. And one of the assistant coaches got a little bit upset that they were losing too many wickets. And the head coach very cleverly said a few words to say, calm it down. You're not displaying good behavior to the rest of the dressing room, and you are affecting the tone. Just like the study I told you about, when people are happy, they score more runs. It's the same. If you are an assistant coach and you're getting anxious, you're getting nervous, you're shouting, you're screaming, you're not increasing the happiness. You're probably decreasing the happiness of some of the players, and they're not going to perform well. So you actually sabotage the process. So that's why I think we can all do better. I can do better. I can assure you, I'm going to make lots of mistakes today, tomorrow, and the next day. But if I can learn from them, then I become a better mentor for other people. And that's what I think we need to do in sport. We need to do something very uncomfortable. Get outside of our comfort zone, become more educated in sports science, and take a hard look at ourselves. A lot of coaches, administrators are too scared to take on board people like us who can really help you.
Right.
Just because
honestly, I think that maybe oftentimes we talk about the players who want the psychological help, but I think coaches in their own responsibility to themselves and the responsibility to themselves should be able to say, okay, am I reacting this way in the game? Is it necessary to react this way? Because I've seen it in football. And why I talk about football, they're so close to the players. You know, the difference to cricket, you're out in the middle by yourself, right? You had a game plan coming in. You know what you coach, what they ask you to do. And the captain, if you're fielding, the captain is there with you. And you can be together. Or if you have a senior batsman with you, you can stop, go in the middle and exchange some words and go back. And, you know, for instance, the senior batsman can calm down the youngster at the other end and bring his mind back into the game. In football, we hardly ever have that because the game is going so fast that only when you have an injury that players can get together. But the coaches, 90% is on the sideline, and it doesn't have to move from the sideline. And he's just in the ears of a player. And they talk about happiness is important. I've seen coaches destroy and turn around a game because of how he spoke to the players or a particular player that made a mistake. All right, so listen, before there's a coach on here, he's a football coach. He's a soccer coach now. I guess he used to call it football when he was in Jamaica. Now he's in the US, he's calling it soccer. So his thing is ask, a direct question. At what age would you introduce your players to psychology, to the psychology aspect of the game? Sherrick Williams, I want to ask you that.
Great question. And it's sort of like asking, at what age do you introduce people to sport? If you have a look at Andre Agassi, there's photos of him, I think it was on Wimbledon, at age 3 holding a tennis racket. It's no different. If you can introduce somebody to sport, you can introduce them to sport psychology. But what you do is obviously you don't do how I do it, sit you down with PowerPoints and show you research. But what you can do is what you do with Michael Phelps. Every night, Michael Phelps's mother sat him down, lied him down and got him to go into bed, and she taught him progressive muscular relaxation. He would learn a relaxation technique to relax his whole body, and as a result, he slept better and he was more emotionally calm compared with most people of his age. And you've seen what he did in terms of Olympic gold, etc. So you can start young, but what the more cognitive things obviously you need to be older to really understand the concepts. And so I like personally to work with people who are 18 or older for a few reasons. One, also legal reasons. It's just easier. You don't have to have the parents involved, etc. So that's one advantage. Also, a degree of maturity helps you understand the concepts better. But no, it's a great question. You can start. I mean, I don't know, because I never deal with anybody younger than, I don't know, under 15. I've really only worked with 18-plus-year-olds. I worked in Rajasthan. I worked with under 16-year-old cricketers, and we would do 3.5 hours non-stop, 5 days a week. And they concentrated amazingly. I mean, you often hear, oh, athletes can't concentrate. What a load of rubbish. What we know from research is that if you exercise, your ability to concentrate is actually better, because your parts of the brain associated with concentration are actually better. So athletes can concentrate with somebody like me for a long time. So, but in terms of how young, if you want to do things like diaphragmatic breathing, progressive muscular relaxation, basic meditation, you can do it. I know you can do it with at least 8-year-olds, because I have actually had a friend who I've done it, their child, I've done it with an 8-year-old, and they quite liked it. So, you know, maybe 7, 8, I'm not really sure, but definitely young. If you can kick a football very effectively, you can certainly learn diaphragmatic breathing and progressive muscular relaxation.
I have another football question for you. And, you know, penalty taking is one of the areas that affect a lot of players. You know, they have a wide area to kick to. But Enjabulo Moyo, he wants to know what makes the best penalty takers in football, and how best can one train themselves. And I guess this is the psychological side of things he's talking about, concentration.
Okay, so one thing that's very important to make sure everybody understands, I do not deal with tactics and techniques. I'm not a specialist of rifle shooting. I'm not a specialist of cricket. And I'm not a specialist of how to kick a penalty shot. But what I can do is help them with create a routine. Now, I don't know what Ronaldo does, but it's quite clear that before Ronaldo takes his penalty kicks, he is doing some kind of routine that he looks like he's visualizing. He looks like he's doing some sort of breathing exercise to calm himself down. And that's the sort of thing that somebody like me can really have a big impact on. Same in rugby. When you take a penalty kick, you'll see that the All Blacks back 25 years ago there was a guy called Grant Fox. A number of people started creating routines when they take their penalty kicks. And it's the same thing in cricket. I teach players to create a routine as they walk across the rope, as they go out to field, as they go out to bat. And the same thing with penalty kicks. I'm sorry to the audience member, I can't tell you the nitty-gritty of the technique, because that's not something I do. It's the same as I don't teach people to cook. I can't cook. But what I do is, once you've worked out the biomechanics of how you want to do the penalty shot, I can show you how you can create a psychological routine that makes you more likely to achieve the result you want. And that's not a fool.
That's where he's coming from. That's where I think Enjabulo is coming from. I think he's coming from that area, because penalty kicks is something that, yeah, you might have a specialty kicker who's going to be your number one penalty taker. But when it comes down to a penalty shootout, where you have 5 guys have to take a penalty, and the person who is last in that penalty kick, some coaches put their best player last, some coaches put their best player first to get the team motivated by scoring first. But it's different in the different areas. What he's talking about, and I don't have to ask him this. I know it has to do with the mental side of taking a penalty kick. What can players do? So I like that your answer is you have addressed both, and we are getting some good response from this. The people who are agreeing with you. You know, you have and Juliet Alvarenga, who is saying that the happier the environment, the better the results, and she buys into that also. And
what was her first name?
Juliet.
Juliet is really correct. And where's the proof? Yeah. Go to Real Madrid. Go to Real Madrid. And what did Zidane say about Ronaldo? He said, I don't really care too much about what Ronaldo does. The reality is, his performances has proven himself. The only thing I want, this is what Zidane said, the only thing I want is for Ronaldo to be happy. She's right. she's so right. If you make the environment conducive for happiness, you're halfway there. The other half is you need to be mentally strong. So it's not just, you can't walk around all happy. You need to have mental toughness as well.
All right. So before we move on, so there's one area you and I discussed, and we want to cover it a bit, is a 1-year sports psychologist program. But let me get something out of the way first.
Okay.
In all of this, do you find that players will come to you voluntarily to ask you for help instead of them just going through the team or the let's call it our institution? They reach out to you to get some clarity on sports psychology.
Back 30-something years ago, no, they would run for the hills, and I don't blame them because my skills weren't that good. But as I got better and better and better, I started having amazing results. And as a result, people would hear about it. And the good thing about it was it also increased my confidence. I started to realize, hey, I can really do this. And as a result, I calmed down because I used to be a bit more militant, a little bit more pushy because, you know, it's hard to get jobs in this industry because everybody's scared of me. But I found that as I did more and more years at this, I got better at it. And I would relax more. And Zimbabwe cricket is the best example. I was amazed. I went there in 2016 and I actually just donated my time for 2 months. That person after person after person would come up to me and said, I've heard good things about you. I want to train with you. I had never had it like I had at Zimbabwe cricket. It was amazing. It really was cool. Part of the reason why was I had established myself. I owe Hamilton Masakadze a big thank you. You know, the reality is I'm sitting down with Hamilton Masakadze. He was one of the international players at the time. And it just dawned on me. I've now donated my time in 25 countries, 136 organizations, getting my skill level really high. I created a 66-session mental skills training program with 14,258 PowerPoint slides, blah, blah, blah. And what I realized, most importantly, I'd got my skill levels to where I want to be. And if a player doesn't want to train with me, there's only so much I can do. You know, with time, they will turn around and I'll be able to get through to just about anybody. You know, even the coaches and even the directors of cricket and football who at the moment, some of them too scared to sit down just for 1 hour and just do a PowerPoint presentation with me to get an idea. You'd be amazed how many are so scared just to do that. But what you find is as you get older and older and more experienced, you start to realize what works and what doesn't, and they come to you. I had one guy who actually paid for my airfare to go from, I think I was in Malaysia at the time. He flew me all the way to South Africa. He paid for my accommodation, etc., took me out. And I trained him for something like 5 weeks. And then a year later, he brought me back again. So, you know, when they get to that level, and that's just a player, not a team, a player, they do. You'll be, in fact, just tonight, I got a player from one of the top 6 international teams on the planet saying, I need to do sessions with you again. They do. It's amazing. And it's so sad. That's the thing that really upsets me the most about all of this is right here, right now, there are people who are directors of football, directors of cricket, presidents, CEOs, and they're not using people like me. And it's largely because of fear. Oh, we don't think the players will take to you. Oh, there's this reason and that reason and this reason. And yet if you talk to the players, don't ring up your mates in the other teams that I've worked with and talk to the people that you are most close to. Talk to the players I've trained and the ones I've trained the most. They'll tell you they love this stuff. They need this stuff. I mean, you take Fab du Plessis. He talked to the media about having a need for this sort of stuff. You talk to Dhoni, MS Dhoni, one of the best players ever for India, let alone the planet. And he talks about having and not being as mentally strong as he should be. Even Brian Lara from your part of the world talked about not being mentally tough enough initially. And they need people like me. They really do. I mean, right now.
And Adrian, I'm not, let me just say something quickly before you move on. And people hearing you might feel that you're selling yourself, but I don't buy into that. I think your facts to underpin what you're saying, and so why isn't it that they're using you more frequently, or not you in particular, but sports psychologists?
Thank you. It's not. This is not about Adrian. I can lend you to a sports psychologist in Jamaica who says she can't get work, and it's not because of Adrian. It's people are scared of psychology. I actually do quite well. I have lots of people I train online, but she doesn't have that exposure because she doesn't have the experience. But it's not about Adrian. We need to up the level. We need to become more sophisticated with sport science. I'll give you a different example. Nothing to do with psychology. Analysts. I know 2 analysts in particular who are underutilized. They can provide so much service, but what they are told is, I'll only give them 2 minutes, only give them 3 minutes, whatever. And they're also told things like, I make motivational videos of the guys hitting sixes, get them excited about the next match, when they could be using their skills. Now, this is not about Adrian. This is not about sports psychology per se. It's about sports science. We need to get better.
All right, and I'm not rushing you, but we want to get the questions in. We want to get the questions, and we have not covered 2 areas that I think is very important going forward. But we have a very good question. We are having some good questions. Nigel Webb is asking, how do you, as a sports psychologist, interact or communicate with the coaches regarding the players' issues or fears? How do you maintain players' confidence as it relates to confidentiality? 2-part question there for you. And I love the question.
Fantastic question. Yeah. And I'm so glad you asked that. The reality is, anything you say to me is private and confidential, and no coach is going to get it out of me. I have a black belt in freestyles of Kung Fu, and I'll do my very best to make sure you do not get that information. When people come to see me, it's a different relationship when they go to see almost anybody else. We're like a doctor, that anything you tell us comes to me, and that's as far as it goes. And here's the nice thing when it comes to me opposed to other sports psychologists. My memory sucks. I've got no flipping memory. You tell me something 20 minutes from now, I won't remember anyhow. But no, it's a very important question. And I think I want to just say one extra thing to Nigel. I said earlier on that I don't usually deal with people's problems. Let's imagine you've got a problem with the bio bubble, or you've got a problem with batting collapses. I don't tend to actually deal with those problems, because especially the more personal ones, because usually people don't really want to change. And so what I do is I train you mentally. I do 8 words. Improve performance by increasing your mental toughness and your happiness. And as a result, you handle things better, like the bio bubbles, like batting collapses. You handle them better. Now, there are specific things you can do for both of those examples, and like concentration, etc. You mentioned concentration just briefly in 10 seconds. I have a thing called TRIPE, TRIPE, which stands for turn on and off, regular meditation, ignore irrelevant things, staying positive, and creating an environment that's conducive to concentration. So there are specific things that a sports psychologist can teach people that a coach, etc., won't know, that I can help with specific things. But one of the most important things to do is to focus on increasing this and increasing mental toughness. And you do that by establishing, so for instance, let's say that I got a 1-year or 4-year contract with, I don't know, Manchester United or the Proteas or West Indies cricket. I look at it as a 3-phase process. The first phase is what Nigel was talking all about. It's creating trust, respect, honesty with the players. And so, for instance, if you were one of the players, Vin, with you, because you already know me a little bit, you feel comfortable with me, it won't take as long as with other people. But I'm trying to create individual relationships with the coach, the assistant coaches, the management, maybe the masseuse, especially the masseuse if I'm going to get a free massage, and then the players. And so what I need to do is get everybody to at least respect me. They don't have to like me, but respect me, And that only comes when you do things like everything's confidential. The coaches don't find out anything. The masseuse does not find out anything about who I've talked to, what other people have told me. And what I actually like to do is actually spend my first few weeks working with a coach in particular, because if the head coach has done 14 sessions with me, then they can go say to the players, I really want you to sit down with Adrian and do a whole lot of sessions. I've even done sessions with Adrian and my life is better. That's what you really want. So if I was working with the West Indies, I'd want Phil Simmons to sit down with me for 14 sessions and learn how to become more effective using psychology. And then he would then say, wow, I had no idea. And then he would go to the players and say, look, he's better than I realized. And there's so much from psychology that I really had no idea. We can do this. Why don't you give it a go? And it's the same if I was with Manchester United or the Proteas or whoever. The reality is the first phase, it doesn't matter where you are. Soccer, volleyball, it doesn't matter. You're trying to create great relationships. Then the second phase is all about individual sessions. And so what I do with you might be different with somebody else, which is different with somebody else. But ultimately, you're trying to improve the way they think so that you don't have the stupidity of throwing a ball at the 84th minute in an Italian Liga game, or you don't have Zidane's headbutt, or you don't have the coach shouting at the players on the sideline as much, etc., etc. And that can take quite a long period of time. It might take you 18 months. It may take 6 months. Who knows? And then finally, the third phase is when you now start doing more teamwork, team group sessions, because now the players have been trained mentally. You don't have many naysayers at the back of the room saying it's stupid. And so now everybody contributes. So you can create team purpose statements. You can create team mission statements, vision statements, and all that sort of stuff. What type of player do you want to be on the field? What type of player do you want to be in the gym, away from sport, etc., etc. And so I see it as a three-phase thing. One, create an establishment of rapport and trust, which solves Nigel's issues. And then individual sessions, and then eventually individual and group sessions.
All right, great. And before I move on, I want to thank all my viewers, for coming on and joining us today. We do have sports psychologist Adrian McInman helping us out today. Loads of knowledge. We're going to talk about something, his book before we end. But I want to thank you again, Adrian, for coming on, and thank all my viewers for tuning in today. We have much more coming in other episodes down the road. Before I have to ask you this question now, Adrian, because then we're going to move on to the real tough stuff and we don't have much time, but we're going to do that. I have to ask you, on the day, what is your role on game day in either cricket or football? Let's talk about football. What do you think you offer them on game day?
On game day, my job is largely done. And the reason why is we already know by statistics and research who's going to win. The reality is it's almost determined. We already know by the confidence level, how much sleep you got, how much good quality food you ate, and all those things. The game's almost determined ahead of time. It doesn't sound sexy. It doesn't sound exciting. The fans don't really want to turn up if they already know the game's determined ahead of time. But that's the reality. Is there's so many factors that play in the result ahead of time that it does take the romance out of it. And so I take a step back on game day. On game day, there's not much I need to do. And if I've done my job really well, which does mean that I have to have a long-term contract, not some piddly 3-month stupid thing, but a proper contract. If I've been training the players for years and months, etc., then as a result, they're thinking in the right way, and I don't need to do anything. The only reason I need to be there is really for two things. One, just to keep an eye on what's going on, so I observe, did I notice something that was a little bit odd, so I can talk about it at a later date to somebody. And the other thing, as a sounding board for the coaches and the staff. Oftentimes, it's a really great time in the changing room to be talking to the staff It's one of the times when they let their hair down, and because they know they're not doing a session with me, so their hair is down, they're relaxed, and they ask me all sorts of questions. So it's a great way to get to know the guys better, etc. But in terms of the players, I don't really need to do that much, and I don't. There are times, however, especially in test matches, if an opener gets out, I can actually train them on that day because they're not going to be doing anything else for another, until tomorrow before they start fielding, etc. So sometimes I will do sessions, but not that often. It just depends on how much access I've had before. If I've had lots of access, there's no need to do anything on that game day. Whereas the coach, they need to be more involved, obviously, in game day.
Yeah. No, all right. So now, we're going to a serious area. And it's a good segue that you mentioned something about working with a long time with the players. So it's a good segue into the next area that we want to look at, right? And that is your a 1-year program. How would you set up a 1-year program for a sports psychologist program? I know you can't go through the entire month, but a year. But just give us an example what that would entail.
Well, the first thing I'd say is, would any really well-respected international coach accept a 1-year contract? And the answer is probably no. And so I would ask you, well, why only 1 year to start with would be my first question, is if I am so well known, if I have all this material and all these techniques, etc., why limit me to 1 year? Sounds like you don't really believe in me. So to a certain extent, I should almost say, no, forget it. Let's do something sensible. That's one way of looking at it. But if we were going to take what you're suggesting of 1 year, I sort of partially answered it in that I would split that up into 3 phases. The first phase is getting people comfortable, getting them to at least respect the idea that they're going to train mentally just as much as they're going to train physically. And that can take X period of time depending on the person. Some right from day one. I remember when I was with Afghanistan cricket, on the very first day, one of the players came up to me, was so excited that I was here, gave me a sports psychology book that also dealt with cricket on the very first day and was really excited. But then there are other players who couldn't wait to see the backside of me and never see me again. So it takes longer with them, obviously, right? And so that's the first phase, is breaking down people's barriers. And what I have found is the number is 7. If you can get somebody, be it a coach, a director of cricket, a masseuse, a physiotherapist, whoever, a player, 7 1-hour sessions, and you usually have broken down their barriers and they're now receptive to train. They may still not dig it. They may not like my accent and all those things, but they now begrudgingly, at worst, accept the fact that there's a lot in this. And so what you've got to do is you've got to set up the system so that you are given 7 1-hour sessions with each people. And after that, you've broken down almost anybody's barriers, and then you can move on to stage 2. Stage 2 is all about individual brain training, individual mental skills training. So I teach them things like noise, and noise is like that. Your thumb is sticking down and your fingers are sticking up. You want to decrease your thumb and increase your fingers. You want to decrease N and increase OISE. N is neuroticism. Get rid of it. Anxiety, worry, you don't want it. O is optimism. Thinking the future is going to get better. You want that, etc., etc., etc. I won't go into the other ones. So there are things like that that I will teach everybody individually so they gain more mental toughness, more happiness, and so they make better decisions on game day. They make better decisions away from the game. Then we move to the third phase. Combination of individual and group sessions, and that's the really cool part. By that stage, everybody is thinking more effectively, making better decisions, and they work better as a team, and then it's great. You can do so many cool things. For instance, I'll just give you one example. On Monday, there is an article coming out on batting collapses. There's a really cool cricket journalist by her name is Krisania Young, and she interviewed me about 3 times or so. I can't remember exactly. And so I ended up actually interviewing some international cricketers, some international coaches, some franchise cricketers, just to get their input. And we made the article really nice. And it's all about what to do about batting collapses. And the thing I was always stuck on was, why would you even be concerned with a batting collapse? Because if you're training this properly, batting collapses are not likely to happen. And if they do, well, you know what to do. You just use the appropriate mental facilities. But it was interesting to watch that the Proteas were talking about having a batting collapse only 24 hours ago. So they do happen. And so that's where you can bring the whole team in together in that third phase. Once they've trained with me for enough time and they're thinking more effectively, you can then do really effective group sessions.
Great. I know. Okay. So now my viewers, fortunately for us, Adrian has put a book together, right? Phenomenal performances, and all that is being talking about here is within this book. And if we can talk to that now, because what your book covers, Adrian, it says, learn how to improve your performance by increasing your happiness and mental toughness with nests, habits, and noise. I'm going to give you the opportunity now to speak to that. I think you mentioned nest before, but could you go into the habits and the noise and see? You just mentioned noise by the thumb with N and the OISE. So we have touched on all them, but can you just sort of reassure some of the or review some of the things that you did? Let us finish up with that.
I can reassure you. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for showing the book. Actually, I appreciate that. What I'm all about is 8 words: improving performance. And I do it by 2 mechanisms: increasing mental toughness and increasing happiness. Now, there are other ways to improve performance, obviously. But what I did was I looked at all the research for a very long time. We're talking about decades. And I found that mental toughness and happiness tended to be things that really were very powerful in improving performance. We talked about Zidane and Ronaldo with happiness, and we haven't talked as much about mental toughness, but we know that mental toughness is massively important, and not just in sport. Let's take education. If you are a parent and your child goes to an exam, 25% of the reason why they succeed or not depends on how mentally tough they are. If you've got two children and they do the same amount of study and they have the same amount of intelligence, etc., the teachers are roughly the same, but one's mentally tough and one's not mentally tough, the mentally tough will do better on the exams time after time after time. And it's no different in anything. The more mentally tough and the happier we are, we perform better. So what I did was first I spent decades looking at the research to work out what are the things from psychology that improve performance the most. And what we know is mental toughness and happiness. Now, most sports psychologists work on mental toughness, but they don't work on happiness. And there's nobody in the English-speaking and the French-speaking world, as far as I can tell, who combine the two together. So that's the unique thing that I do. I combine techniques to improve mental toughness with techniques to improve happiness. And what I've found is the best techniques to do so are things like you mentioned, and in the subtitle of my book, NESTs, which we talked about: nutrition, exercise, sleep, thinking, and social support. And then notice the T is thinking. And the thinking relates to noise, N-O-I-S-E. And we talked about noise a little bit. We talked about decreasing your thumb and increasing the others. So the third one is internal locus control. The fourth one is self-esteem. And the fifth one is extroversions. You got neuroticism you want to get rid of. Then you got optimism you want to get more of. That's viewing the future is better. I, internal locus control, believing things happen because of you and not luck or chance. S, self-esteem, liking yourself. And E, extroversion, being sociable but not impulsive. So in the book, you learn things like how there's no such thing as stress. And I'll say that again. There's no such thing as stress. If you do nothing else, send me an email and I'll actually give you a copy for free of chapter 4, which is all about there's no such thing as stress. And what you can do is you can have a look at my website, and you've got the website there right now, and you'll have a look at, you'll see, for instance, Hamilton Massacres is there. And he says that, you know, the stuff on how there's no such thing as stress was really beneficial. I can't tell you his name, but I worked with an international cricket captain, household name. Everybody on the planet knows him. And he said it was the most useful thing when he realized, no, there is no such thing as stress. It is fear. Every time we say we're stressed out, we're not scared. Oh, sorry, we're not stressed. We're scared. We're scared of the ramifications of what might happen. So, for instance, you're driving in a car to an important meeting and you're on time, no problems. But then the traffic banks up and you start to get worried about might not make it on time. I might not make it on time. I might not make it on time. And as you get closer and closer to the meeting time and you really start to panic, you're not stressed. You're scared of the ramifications of what's going to happen. Now, I would normally spend a whole hour and not 60 seconds to explain that, but that's the sort of thing you'll find in the book. And what I have found is people tell me just that one chapter alone really helps them in their sporting life and in their personal life. And then if you have a look at the next chapter, it tells you what happens every time, even if you call it stress, if you continuously say that you're scared or stressed, then as a result, you end up sabotaging yourself in performance, in health. You don't live as long. You're more likely to have a heart attack, cancer, etc., etc. So there's a whole lot of stuff in there that applies. As I think there was a lady called Tracy, if I remember correctly, who asked, does this apply away from sport? And absolutely does. Mm-hmm. So I hope that answers your question.
It certainly does. And I want to mention the website is up on the screen. Viewers, just make sure you visit. You get more information there. Definitely, you get more information from the book itself. The book can be had on Amazon, right, Adrian?
Yeah, and it's the ebook is really cheap. I purposely kept the ebook very, very cheap. I think it's only about $6 or something. And they're both the paperback and the ebook are both available on Amazon. In fact, it's the only place is Amazon.
Amazon, definitely. Well, the information given here, and let me just put a narrative from the book also. When you say this book was written for individuals who believe they are doing okay, or hopefully better, want to better themselves, are intellectually curious, are willing to put in the effort to change, and expect proof from research, not just opinion. I don't, and that is something that we definitely want to look at. It's now what, an hour and just about an hour and a half.
Oh yeah.
It went by so fast. You know, we have one person saying your awesome presentation. I'm so enjoying every second. This is one of my.
A beer or two, don't I?
Yes, her name is really Christine Bartley, not Kareem McLean. Kareem McLean is our son that he played for me, as a matter of fact, as a youngster. Okay. So she's a involved parent with a school. Everton is from the UK, is saying very interesting and needed topic, right? And I think those comments alone can tell you exactly what this is. And we have a young coach in Jamaica also, and what he's actually saying, coaches need this psychological preparation. He changed that in another comment. So, you know, all these people are appreciative of your presentation, Adrian. I myself, even though speaking to you prior to, I got more from this than maybe the 45 hour that I spoke to you before. I really love the presentation. I want to thank you personally, and I know the other coaches that are online would do the same. It is a pleasure, and it was information that we should take away and think about, because I do believe at this point that sports psychologists in a team plays a big part on how we move forward with our concentration. You saw where Enjabolo asked about the penalties. That's an area that needs serious concentration. It's a psychological thing when you're taking a penalty, and you now have to take that penalty to win the game. So you're the final person in the 5 or penalty takers, and this comes down to you. and you have a 6'5" goalkeeper with his arms spread out, you're left with, on either side of him, you're left with maybe about 3 feet on either side or 4 feet on either side. You now have to get that mental preparation, and that can't happen on the day. It has to happen before the day. I know you like that, but that is true, So once again, I appreciate you coming on. It was really, really a pleasure having you on. Maybe some other time we can get deeper into another area that you like. Yes, most of it, a lot of it, we mentioned cricket, but as I said to you in my conversations with you before, mental preparation is no different in any sport. It's mental preparation. You may know, you as a psychologist that have worked with cricketers can speak to some things that might affect them, but in general, let me ask you to finish on. In general, don't you think mental preparation, doesn't matter what sport it is essential, and doesn't mean that because you don't know cricket, you don't know football, or you don't know volleyball, you can't speak to it as a psychologist?
Well, let's take Novak Djokovic. Is he any good?
Mm-hmm.
He is? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what he says is if we trained our brains as much as we trained our bodies, we would be able to achieve our potential. But the vast majority, I would say probably 100% of all the people listening right now, let alone all the ones who are not listening, I guarantee you 100% of all the people listening right now are not achieving their potential and are not training their brain effectively. Now, I'm not saying that if they now train their brain effectively, they'll get their potential, because they may not be doing other things as well. But the reality is, if we train our brain effectively, and here's the beautiful thing. Once you've done the training, you only need to spend a maximum of 5 minutes a day. Now, sure, the training takes a bit more time. I might need to spend an hour with you every day, or maybe 5 days a week for a decent period of time. But once you have trained the mental stuff, the techniques and the information, here's the beautiful thing. You only need to do maybe a 1-minute routine and a 3-minute routine, or a 5-minute routine. You can't do that with the physical. A physical warm-up takes you 15, 20, whatever minutes. But the mental thing is very economical once you've got to an elite level. But it might take you 100, 200 hours to get to that level. But once you're there, it's fantastic. You don't need to spend much time to get, as Djokovic would say, to get closer to your potential. So if I was to leave you with one thought, it would be a quote that I really like from a woman called Anais Nin. And I say this to the administrators, the board members, the CEOs, the captains, all the decision makers. Anais is correct. She says, life shrinks or expands according to your courage. If you're scared to sit down and talk with me, if you're scared to sit down and look at my PowerPoints, you're sabotaging yourself and you're sabotaging other people if you don't already have somebody else like me helping you. Because there is a huge world out there that 99.999% of people have no idea about. Performance psychology has really improved. In that 2021, we can do so much. So have a bit more courage. Be willing to get outside your comfort zone and do a simple thing like sit down, even if it's done by Zoom and WhatsApp, and just do a couple of sessions with me to get an idea of what's possible, or do it with somebody else. It doesn't need to be me. Get yourself a real mental skills expert and really learn what's possible.
That's great. That's a nice way to end on. That's a nice note to end on, and also for Solomon Alexander, who's saying, thanks for this wealth of information on improving performance. I will definitely check out the book. So
did you pay him to say that?
I was about to. But that's great. Great work. I want to once again thank you for the wealth of knowledge, as Solomon says, Adrian. And I want to thank my viewers for coming on, for joining us today. I myself enjoyed the entire presentation. We could go on forever, but we have to come to an end. So thank you, Adrian. Thanks to thanks to all the viewers for joining us, and see you next time in our next episode. Hopefully, God's willing, next week, Saturday. Thanks much, guys.
Cool.